Hello everybody, this is Dr. Stringer. I'm coming to you today from my office at home. So this week we are talking about technology and criminology. We are on module 14, so we should have one more module to go, and then we'll be all wrapped up for the semester. Keep in mind that your research papers are due by the end of the next module, so you'll want to get those done, get started working on those as soon as you can, because usually they can get a bit hectic at the end of the semester. So go ahead and start doing that. You'll find all those instructions and things like that at D2L, and of course email me if you have any questions. So anyway, today I'm gonna talk a little bit about the modules that we're going to talk about, or that this module's on, and how criminology's kind of evolved over time. Essentially, we're going to talk a little bit about DNA, and that's what your readings are going to be on. 3 articles to read: Batts, Adrian Rain, and Buffkin and Luttrell this week. And they're pretty, a little bit shorter readings than you had in the past. I think the Rain article is only like 3 pages, so a little bit of light reading for this module. So you can hopefully use that time wisely to get started on your papers. Anyway, so in criminology, we tend to focus on thinking about why are some people criminal. And sociology has really kind of dominated this with different theories that you've probably all heard of, hopefully in 1101 or in your theory courses, social learning theory, social bond theory, etc. But these are all relatively newer theories, considering where theory started at in criminology. You guys have probably heard of some of the earlier theories, and we'll talk about some of those. So, technology as it relates to this has kind of affected the way that we think about causes of crime, right? So, just to give you guys a little bit of a history lesson so you can kind of put the readings for this week into context. You remember Cesare Lombroso and the idea that he had about people with different sized skulls, and certain sized skulls would be more criminogenic, etc. And so this didn't involve a whole lot of technology, right? So it didn't take very much to come up with that, and we've evolved a lot from that due to differences in technology that we have today. Richard Dugdale, yeah, I'm pronouncing that right. He's not as famous as Lombroso, but he studied the Jukes family and looked at them and found that 58 of them were officially involved in the criminal justice system. And so he found that this was fascinating, and maybe there's something going on there with that family that caused them to be criminogenic, right? That caused 58% of them, probably mostly the men, I would imagine, were committing crimes. If you haven't seen this, is a wonderful world. It's called the Whites family of West Virginia, and it's a big crime family, essentially, not in the sense like the mob, but this is actually a documentary done by Johnny Knoxville, the guy from Jackass, and so it's kind of interesting to look at if you're into the kind of outlaws and things like that, and it talks about their criminogenic family as well. We've also seen some research and things over time that talked about tattoos, and so Earnest Hooton came up with the ideas that certain people with tattoos and dark eyes and thick hair, maybe thin eyebrows, that these people were more likely to be criminals. In today's day and age, I don't think that many of us would really buy the idea that a tattoo is going to cause someone to commit crimes, right? You guys are probably familiar with the idea of correlation versus causation, right? Just because you have a tattoo doesn't mean that you're going to be a criminal. However, there's probably a lot of criminals that have tattoos, right? So that's something to think about. This is actually something from ACJS, where someone was actually doing an abstract or a poster presentation on an analysis of tattoos and their effects on recidivism, with the idea that the tattoo was actually having an effect on recidivism, which I took a picture of because I thought was fascinating, because with all that we know today, it's not, you put some ink under your skin is probably not going to make someone commit a crime. So why were these theories of crime abandoned? Well, a lot of people probably started to think that maybe, like I've been telling you, that they're not quite the big causes, that maybe they're just correlated, and they're largely based on stereotypes. For example, how many of you have tattoos? I know a few of you in this class that I've had before, but I don't actually know your tattoo status. The vast majority of you I've never met, I can't really say for sure, but I would imagine that, a good portion of you in today's society probably have some sort of tattoo somewhere, and I would assume that, you're not all criminals, especially since you're criminal justice majors. There was also some concerns of eugenics and things like that, but I won't get into all of that in the interest of trying to keep my video under the required 15-minute college time. But looking at biology, and keep in mind that I'm not a biologist, I'm a criminologist, and some of you might actually be biology students, so you might know a little bit more about this than I do. But technology has allowed us to measure different things like genes, DNA. And we've kind of talked about how DNA is used in criminal investigations and things like that. But if you think about also the idea that looking at these genes, well, maybe there's certain genes that come together that cause people to commit crimes, or at least correlated with crimes. And there's also, technology helps us to look at IQs, school achievement, reading ability, mental disability, personality traits, attitudes, schizophrenia, alcoholism, all of these different things that we couldn't really get at so easily, back when we were measuring people's skulls for different shapes and things like that, right? So this technology has really helped criminology to move along, so to speak. So when you think about, well, is crime genetic? And this is where the twin studies come in, and you'll read a little bit about those, I'm sure, in Adrian Rain's article and the others as well. But looking at twins, you can actually try to study them and see, well, if we have two twins, that we assume that they have similar genes. Now, there's a difference between the MZ twins and the DZ twins. And the DZ twins, I believe it was the DZ twins, that are they have exactly the same genes. No, the MZ twins are exactly the identical. Sorry. And then the DZ twins are fraternal. They have about 50% of the same genes, but they're not exactly the same, right? So you can kind of look in comparison across these things, and a lot of what the twin studies do is they'll split them up and have them adopted out to different families, and so then they'll look at, well, did this one start committing crime and that one didn't, and things like that, to be able to say, well, was it genetic or was it the environment? Because a lot of our modern criminal justice or criminology theories account for not only genetics, but also environment, right? Don't get me on a big tangent about, learning theory, but most of you have probably seen people or heard of people, drinking a beer or smoking marijuana or something like that, and they probably had to learn how to do it, right? But then again, some people might be more predisposed towards alcoholism or drug use and things like that. They might have some sort of genetic issues there going on. So anyway, but looking at these adoption, studies, it's very interesting to think about, well, if we have a biological father who is a criminal, but then he has a son, and then the son is adopted out to a father that is not a criminal, ideally, right? If you're, getting an adoption child, they would give a lot of background checks and things like that. And then the son becomes a criminal, it makes it more likely that it's related to biology, right? Than it does, if it's related to something like, so looking at, the adopted father. But then again, the other thing can happen too. So maybe the biological father was not a criminal. His son went over to an adopted father who was a criminal, and then the son became a criminal. That would mean that it would be more likely that it was an environmental issue, that he learned this criminal behavior from the adopted father versus being a genetic issue from the biological father. Of course, the opposite would be true too in both scenarios. And so I've just kind of, explained that to you already, so I won't bore you all with that. And looking at, the differences between the MC and the DC twins, we can go into all of those details as well. But I'm already hitting 11 minutes, and like I said, the university wants me to keep these under 15, so you can read all of that stuff if you want. One thing that I wanted to make sure that I touched on was Mednick's adoption study. And so he looked at 14,000 adopted children, and he compared essentially what I was just talking about, an adopted parent that was convicted of a crime, a biological parent that was convicted, and yes or no's for all of them, and the percent of the sons who would later on become convicted of crimes. And you see that there is some interaction there between environment and genes, theoretically, because as you see, if there's an adopted parent who's never been convicted of a crime, and the biological parent has never been convicted of a crime, then only 13% of the sons have been convicted. But then as you see, you go up here with yes for the adopted parent, you hit 14, and with yes for an adopted and no for a biological, with no for a no for an adopted and yes for a biological, you hit 20. So it actually seems to show that biology and genes might be a little bit more important because of this difference between the 20 and the 14%. But then when you look at the differences between having an adopted parent that's convicted of a crime and a biological parent that's convicted of a crime, you see that it's 24.5%. So this will go to help you guys if you ever know of anybody that's ever adopted a child, or you've ever tried to adopt a child, or you've even been adopted yourself. This is why they make adopted parents go through so much of a background check and everything. You can't really do anything about the adopted child's biology and his genes. That's kind of already a given when they're born. But what you can do is try to make sure that they go to a parent who's not a criminal, right? So that's certainly preferable. So it did show that the chronic offenders, biological dads produce some chronic offender biological sons, like I said, and so that kind of goes to show you that genes might have something to do with it, but they don't operate in a bubble, so to speak. Crime is a social phenomenon. It doesn't happen in a laboratory with just genes and everything up. It happens outside in the real world. So it makes sense that you're going to have some interaction between these different things. And I don't want to go on too long because I'm hitting 14 minutes here. But anyway, so read those articles. They're pretty short this week. Make sure that you get, do your quiz. on your discussion boards and everything like that. Make sure you get started on your research paper. And I will talk to you all next week, which will be our final lecture. I know you guys have just been excited with these riveting lectures that I've had. And so with that, I will sign off and hope everybody has a good one.